20% of the workforce. I'm not talking about consultants and outside counsel and outsourced workforce. The employees, 10 to 20% have risk or compliance in their title.
Welcome to UpTech Report. This is our Applied Tech series. UpTech Report is sponsored by TerraLeap. Learn how to leverage the power of video at terraleap.io. Today, I'm joined by my guest, Kayvan Alikhani, who's based in California. He's the CEO and co-founder at Compliance.ai. Welcome. Good to have you on, Kayvan.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Now, Compliance.ai is a regulatory compliance solution and software. So for those out there in firms within banking, financial services, or the insurance industry, this might be an interesting platform you're going to want to check out. Now, on your website, you say, we speed compliance so you can speed your business. Help me understand, okay, what was the problem you initially saw with the industry and with compliance that you set out to solve?
The volume and complexity of regulatory changes that are being handed to regulated companies, specifically in the banking, financial service, and insurance industry, is so high, both from the perspective of the number of changes, the number of pages within these changes, and then the complexity.
And it's not decreasing, it's only increasing.
It's all increasing 300-400% over the past 7-8 years, and it's not showing any sign of slowdown. And meanwhile, organizations are still using outmoded methods that they would have been suitable for a significantly lower volume or significantly simpler regulatory landscape. So we provide essentially a way to transition or transform the way you deal with regulatory changes so that you can be much more effective and efficient in that process. Compliance has become the costliest department along with risk. Risk and compliance combined are the #1 spend within many regulated sectors in the United States. And that is a sign of the methodology that's being used to solve it, which is to throw bodies at it, use manual approaches, or use significantly expensive, error-prone, time-consuming methods to solve compliance and risk issues. And we really think that the availability of digital regulatory content, the availability of cheap CPU, the maturity of automated ML-driven modeling allows for companies to now do things a lot faster, more effectively, and at a much more cost-effective manner.
So we use technology smarter in a better way than just throw more people at it. If I understand, like the platform, you take in the reports from a lot of different regulatory agencies, and then the user can go in and customize the area that covers what location or what they're interested in, and they can customize the reports. Am I getting some of the nuts there, correct?
Think about a very large document. Don't imagine a 2-paragraph news item about the latest fiasco at French Open. Imagine a 100-page substantial document which has everything in terms of obligations, references to other rules and regulations, timelines in it. So now you're facing with not being able to just browse over. You have to read it. You have to assess whether this document is relevant to you, to your role in the organization. What business or operational topics does it map to? What are your obligations as part of this? What are the timelines and deadlines that you need to pay attention to? And what has to happen inside your organization? Imagine having to do that against 300 to 400 documents per week. And imagine that each of those documents on average being 20, 30, 40 pages and all legally worded. That's the framework that we live in. And so our perspective is, first and foremost, how many of those 300-400 are relevant to you? Reduce the size of that funnel by using classification, using your company's business profile as a way to focus on changes that are relevant to you in your role, whether you're a compliance officer, a risk officer, in charge of audit, general counsel, in charge of BSA/ML, privacy, cybersecurity. Depending on topic, depending on concept and operational role, get access to that very reduced collection of content, and then give you all the rich metadata that tells you these are the key deadlines, these are the concepts, these are the topics, these are the cross-referenced rules and regulations, these are your obligations. And from there, you'll be able to make decisions significantly faster and be able to build an inventory of decisions you've made over time. And then, of course, subsequent to that, be able to then interact with those documents, annotate them, assign tasks, take action, and finally report on everything that you've done before, during, and after that rulemaking process. That is really the ultimate goal of a solution that would be called regulatory change management. And that's exactly what we do. Got
it. So I don't know if this is a good analogy to see. When I think of like in the consumer world, often we have like RSS feeds or Feedly or tool or thing. We want to customize what news, what information am I getting in? And consumers have that for a while. But in the business side, it's just you're inundated, it sounds like, with all these updates when it comes to compliance and reports that are coming out. But what you're trying to focus on is, all right, let me actually skim that down to exactly what you need to be paying attention to, and then you know what to take action on.
Yeah, imagine that RSS feed constituted of thousands of changes that you have to then now decipher. Going through all of them in detail is not scalable, and that's what's led to the close to $400 billion in fines, enforcement actions that have been issued against just financial service organizations in the past 8 years alone. And then you have from the other side the significant increase in operational costs, both top line and bottom line impact, and not to mention the reputational impact that it has for companies that fail audit or find their name in the news, or are at a significant competitive disadvantage because they're moving much slower than their competitors who have embraced a transformative approach to change management.
Of course, the common concern that comes along with technology and AI is taking jobs away. You just mentioned we'll throw more people at it. So now you don't need to throw as many people at it. So where's the balance here?
The balance is actually that companies are not properly sized to begin with, because it's so costly to properly size. If you were to take a full manual approach, they really need 20 people and they have 4. They really need 12 people, but they have 6. So what ends up happening is technology coming and saying, this is now a companion, this is a augment, this is an extension of your existing team. It's essentially not one of necessarily saying, start laying people off. It's saying you were understaffed to begin with, and now instead of begging and borrowing additional budgets to hire another 15 people, you have technology automation to the rescue as a way to reduce your overall cost and be ready for scale. And that's been seen. We're not the only business segment that's doing this. We've seen that repeatedly within CRM, within business applications, with the tool you and I are using right now, Zoom. Solutions that scale very rapidly, don't require a huge amount of hand-holding, don't require a huge amount of effort in installation, implementation, or upkeep, SaaS, basically. And from the other side, ones that reduce the amount of work that humans have to do by taking recurring mundane tasks off their back so they can focus on more analytical activities. So we think that is actually a sigh of relief in the what we're seeing, very specifically talking to chief compliance officers, risk officers, general counsel. We have a very, I would say, impressive and humbling advisory group that provides us that type of feedback. And these are CCOs, CROs, GCs, auditors, current and former regulators. And they tell you, look for any and all opportunities for automation, look for any and all opportunities to reduce that complexity. And even the regulators are very much welcoming of this approach.
This concept of a compliance officer now trusting in a technology to take the place of the scores of people that required before. What do you say to then someone saying, how do I know that what you're showing me is everything? How can I trust the technology? How have you guys then solved that?
Yeah, and how were you trusting it before?
Yeah. So
it's basically, what are we comparing it to? The status quo of having humans who make mistakes and are not necessarily your employees, and many times they're outside counsel, and many times they're distracted with a whole bunch of other activity, versus a dedicated set of resources that are systematic. And yes, systems do make mistakes and they do falter, and we are very transparent about that. In fact, we think that that's an essential part of any AI-based system, to provide full transparency on how decisions are being made, what approach is being used in modeling. If there are, any decisions that are being surfaced, what's the confidence in those decisions? And using that approach, clients can now have visibility. That's A. And B, it is not a machine versus human. In our case, it's very much what we call expert in the loop, a nuanced approach to supervised learning that allows us to use experts, not humans, experts, as those who provide not only feedback in the build out of the models, in the training of the models, but also in assuring the quality of the results that are surfaced by our models. We have 100% manual quality assurance coverage of machine-based. So now you're not getting just machine or human, you're getting best of both worlds, a marriage between human and robot, if you will. Hopefully that's not going to create any misunderstandings. It's really providing that healthy collaboration that then says, you're taking advantage of automation, things are happening at internet scale, and yet there are experts that are monitoring and are impacting and are influencing the decisions that are being made that are very specifically recruited for that purpose. So that's how you do that. At the end of the day, you cannot point to a machine and say the machine did it, right? You have to have a accountability of humans by humans, and I would say that the difference is still going to be, yes, the machine made some errors, but what are we comparing to the before and after? And that's been time and time again the case, where they said, earlier I thought I was missing 2 or 3 documents. With Compliance.ai, I found out missing hundreds of changes, or that I wasn't effectively looking at these changes. Yes, maybe in 1%, 2% of cases, or in one document over a 6-month period, or 5 documents over a year. But even in those cases, Compliance.ai came back and made an adjustment and updated that. So it's not ever going to be 100% perfect. That's kind of a nice aspirational goal, but it is significantly close to being perfect in terms of collecting, assessing on a scalable basis. There's just no comparisons, apples and bicycles for me. I mean, imagine you throw 2 or 3 people to look at a 1,000-page rule book to extract the inventory of obligations from that rule book. Well, how long is that effort going to take? And when they're done, what are you going to do with that information the next time the rule book comes out? You have to start all over again, right? But imagine that that's done by a system, extracting those, looking at your feedback about those obligations, and the next time taking advantage of that to do a better job. One is taking 2.5 months, highly expensive lawyers. We both know they're not cheap. The other one is taking minutes and providing you an inventory that's actually learning and working for you in the future. So the differences are time, scale, accuracy, and of course, ultimately the efficiency for growth that it provides for the organizations.
Where I'm fascinated with the role of technology, it truly allows us to do so much more in less time and effort if it's properly trained and managed by a person. It's not autonomous, like just go and it does it all, but it's that combination of I appreciate the term expert in the loop combined with the technology. Now, this is 4 years that you guys have been around, since 2017 that it started. I'm curious from your perspective from the beginning, what's the adoption been like? Like, are people resonating, or what are some of the barriers that you've seen to the adoption technology when it comes to compliance?
Yeah, I think the history part of it is quite fascinating, in that we started with the premise of all we have to do is provide regulatory intelligence. Companies already have risk and compliance solutions. If we just feed this intelligence to them, they're going to be good to go. And we started with that approach. And very quickly, after a series of conversations, listening very carefully to the feedback from the compliance community, we found that intelligence enough is not enough. And intelligence alone is not enough. Why? Because all you've done is now dumped literally a mountain of information at them without providing them with the ability to take action on it. And I think in 2018, we started seeing more and more of the use of the term regulatory change management as opposed to regulatory intelligence or regulatory trend analysis or insights. Not in opposition with each other, but kind of like bringing them together into regulatory change management. Go back 10 years, this was not even a term. There was not such a process in these organizations that would deal with it. So this is something new that started forming 16, 17, 18, started becoming more and more of a curiosity. And what is this? What is Regtech? Regtech is in technologies that help you with monitoring, tracking, and reacting and reporting on regulatory changes by taking advantage of automation and SaaS and ML. We are very much the poster child for that. But then in 2019, we started seeing more and more actual forward-looking CCOs, CROs, GCs that would put requests for information, requests for proposals. And in 2020, in spite of, or maybe because of COVID, you started seeing a much more specific focus on regulatory change management, automation, transforming it into a modernized form, if you will, within the organizations. to the point that we were recipient of over, I want to say 30 RFPs from mid to large size organizations just in the US alone, with comprehensive plans of transforming regulatory change management. I think it went from what the heck is this to let's try it out to now we're going to formally transform our change management solution. I think I've seen that so much right now. It takes less than 5 minutes to explain and get a head nod from heads of compliance risk or audit or general counsel at organizations about the challenge they're facing and the fact that they need to modernize their change management practice. So
if I heard correctly, you'd say that the pandemic has been an accelerant to the compliance industry to saying, yes, we needed to use technology more?
That's right. Think about having to do things from anywhere, using just a browser, not having to rely on going to the office or relying on necessarily 4 walls of firewalls and IT involvement, and not having to rely on a large workforce, having to be able to button down and do things more with less, enforcing and embracing business continuity and resiliency. All of that is very much in line with using SaaS, browser-based, nothing to install, nothing to maintain or update or upgrade ever, and the ability to rely on a highly scalable solution. So that was one side of it. And PPP-related regulations and privacy-related regulations and matters that have to do with cybersecurity, and of course the incoming of a new administration that undid a lot of the deregulation that happened during the prior administration, have been catalysts for a, I would say, very significant uptick in organizations taking a look at how they deal with regulatory change.
On that topic of the way regulatory has changing and some of the things you just mentioned, PPP, the new administration and the act, what are you seeing some of the main trends that someone should be paying attention and aware of with all this happening?
Yeah, first and foremost, privacy continues to be a highly checkered set of regulations and rules. We know we Californians voted into law the California Consumer Protection Act and the Rights Act in November of last year. Again, enforcement actions to ensue in terms of how organizations manage, store, and share consumer information. And what does consumer privacy mean? We see states like New York, Virginia, and others standing their own privacy regulation. There's efforts underway at the federal level to try to come up with comprehensive consumer privacy. And that's very much in line with what happened, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago in Europe with GDPR. So that's one set of rules and regulations that are very much impactful of the organizations. The contrast between GDPR, CCPA, Virginia, New York, and the Illinois biometric regulations that relate to privacy, or the upcoming, I would say, cross-jurisdiction differences between those and the upcoming federal level regulations. Of course, there's huge amount of deregulatory activity that President Biden took in the first 60 days in the office, issuing a collection of over 20 enforcement actions, executive orders, intended to undo the prior administration's policies. And so that then puts pressure on organizations to take a look at that and see how that impacts their business. A series of executive orders, interestingly, one of them, a reaffirmation, I would say, of an executive order that we saw many years ago during the Clinton era of regulatory planning and review, and a recommendation for essentially modernizing regulatory reviews. Modernization has been the focus of many of President Biden's early actions, meaning that businesses that haven't already embraced digital transformation should consider embracing digital transformation very, very soon. And you see that embedded in many of the policies and procedures that are put out. Environment, social, and ESG-based regulations that are essentially coming out. We're seeing more and more focus on ESG-based regulation, corporate governance, essentially environmental, social, and governance. I forget the G for a second, which are putting a lot of emphasis on paying attention to climate change, not as climate change, but as risk. What is the risk of climate change to organizations, specifically banks as it relates to real estate, or in light of the growing Me Too movement in terms of social impacts of organizations taking a much closer look at who do they take money from, who do they partner with, who do they do business with, has now impacted the outcome. And we're looking to a set of ESG-based regulations actually to drive some environmental rules and regulations in the current year and into years to come. And there's at least 10 more, but I name one more for you, which is top of mind for many users, is cryptocurrency and ICO blockchain-related rules and regulations. You see a huge amount of activity by the OCC and other agencies trying to put proper rules and regulations in place to hopefully put an end to the wild, wild west that is crypto and ICO, and give companies a framework that they can work within to deal with ICO and cryptocurrency. So those are some of the trends to look for. And like I said, there's at least 5 or 6 more that we can talk about later as well.
Kayvan, I'm curious, have you personally been involved with compliance for a while? How did you get involved, or were you more come from the technology side and you saw the challenge and you're like, I can solve this challenge over here with technology?
Very much a technologist. Looked at it from the perspective of organizations that are highly regulated, came at it from cybersecurity primarily. Formerly, I was working at RSA, one of the leaders, both in terms of cybersecurity, but also RSA publishes a solution called Archer, which is the leading provider of governance, risk, and compliance solutions for the enterprise, very much including banks, financial service, and insurance companies. We saw the uptick in terms of rules, regulations. We saw the huge amount of consultative and manual labor-driven approaches that were taken to assess that. You have a problem, as a technologist, you're always trying to come up with solutions for that. Because we're not subject matter experts, we ended up then building a solid foundation of advisors coming from the field, seeking their advice. Hey, is this as big a problem as we think it is? Yes. What would this approach work? Yes. And then basically being very, very much collaborative in that effort, and then bringing in the CCOs, CROs, and GCs into that discussion in that early on formation. But it was very much looking at you read the news and look at the stats in terms of where are companies spending their money, and compliance and risk being on the top of the list. Many highly regulated organizations, you find 10, 12, 15, 20% of the workforce. I'm not talking about consultants and outside counsel and outsourced workforce. The employees, 10 to 20% have risk or compliance in their title. And that represents, that tells you where that cost is coming from. Yeah.
Where do you see in the future that percentage will go down to?
I would probably say that instead of looking at that as a cost center, you would start looking at that as a streamlined part of the company's growth development lifecycle, as being, it's part and parcel to, you're trying to expand into a jurisdiction. Now you have a way to have compliance work with you as part of that process, not as a stopgap, not as a friction, not as something that stops things, but actually something that informs you very rapidly, very dynamically. And as part of that, you're trying to launch a new solution. You're trying to acquire another business. You're launching your product into another country. You're taking on clients that you hadn't taken before. All of that is growth, and all of that should not be tampered and should not be basically handcuffed with compliance. Instead, compliance should be part of that process. This is really a transformation. It's not about what percentage necessarily, and obviously that percentage we think should be at least kept steady, if not reduced. But it's ultimately saying, let's look at compliance not as something in the corner, as an afterthought. It's the same thing we talked about 10 years ago about security, right? Security-driven programming, security-driven businesses that are looking at security as part and parcel of what they do, not as an afterthought. And now you're seeing more and more of that in various business applications. And I think regulatory change lends itself very nicely to being that next in line, let's call it streamlined, into being part of that overall business process.
I'm intrigued with this vision you see of compliance, that it's not a burden of the cost, but actually helping you go into new areas. I mean, this And I appreciate you were in this industry already, seeing with enterprises of insurance and finance, and you saw the challenge they had, and you're like, with your technology background, like I can solve this, I can fix this. I imagine there's it's kind of a growth as you peel back the onion and realize the multiple layers. I'm curious, over the last 4 or 5 years, if you go back 5 years ago and tell yourself one thing when you were beginning this journey, what would you say to yourself?
Listen to users much more proactively. Essentially, the value of having a conversation with the stakeholders. So we have a pretty good understanding of the technological capabilities available to us. You know, computation, modeling, the ability to digest and process large volumes of documents. That's the tech side of it. And then on the user side, what is really problematic within their organization? How can you really impact their day-to-day life in a very positive way? In fact, I would tell you, we did a blog series at the end of 2018 with a CCO as the ghostwriter. We called it a day in the life of the compliance professional. And it was from waking up and drinking coffee all the way to the end of the business days. What are you doing, and how can we impact that positively and reduce the stress, reduce the anxiety, reduce the uncertainty, reduce the ability, provide you with tools to help mitigate the risk associated with regulatory change. I would say that more of that is really the way to go. With that, you're much more informed, and you make much better decisions as a result of it.
It's a kind of a amazing transformation or growth. Dig further to the end consumer or the user of, and say, okay, what exactly do you need? How is it used? And that's where the real use comes to shine. I'm curious, what can you share going forward? Like, what's the roadmap? What's the vision? Anything coming up that you're excited about and can share?
We very much started as an organization focused on US-based banks and financial service insurance companies. We're now seeing a global demand. We're seeing multinational requests for companies that are multinationals headquartered elsewhere, operation in the US or vice versa. And so we are very much, we started with G20 and we're a coverage, and we're now looking at expansion beyond that. And additionally, you know, it's not really BFSI, that's bank, financial service, and insurance that are impacted by regulatory change. We know healthcare, energy, environment, and many other highly regulated sectors are very much can take advantage of this type of an approach and this type of transformation. And of course, we think that a much more proactive set of collaboration with the regulators themselves. These are agencies like the Fed, like CFPB, OCC, FCA in the United Kingdom, and many other proactive and I would say forward-looking agencies that are tech-friendly. That type of collaboration is going to highly benefit not only our users, their constituents, of course, and last but not least, the formation of more and more alliances. We're working and talking to AIR as an example, Alliance for Regulators and Regulation, Innovative Regulation, and many similar innovation alliances. We very much welcome that type of collaboration between regulators and regulated companies to come together, sit around the table, and come to a consensus on what would work, make their life easier.
I like the vision and the future of regulatory compliance or across the globe. It's like being able to expand no matter where you are, being able to know it, have this information as a chief compliance officer. You don't have to have a whole army of people now scavenging and looking through all these reports. Use technology and be able to make your life simpler. And as one who's passionate about technology, I'm curious of just even outside, maybe specifically what you guys are building. What do you see as the future of tech? Any tech predictions the next 5-10 years, what we could imagine coming down the road?
Yeah, I think it's going to be very much an enabling technology, enabler. Technology has always been that way. We've seen that time and time again as it related to various business applications, and this is not going to be an exception to that. I think you're going to see more and more of a legal tech and reg tech, where there's more and more collaboration between the legal counsel, compliance community, and the tech community and you're going to see more of a cross-pollination around that. More and more, I would say, business-specific type solutions where they're very much tuned in to the requirements of that business. I think that there's going to be that type of alliance that we talked about is going to lead to cohort-based compliance decisions. So, for example, similar organizations that operate in similar jurisdictions and offer very similar products will start now taking advantage of compliance solutions that actually take advantage of their anonymized and tokenized decisions. And so in that realm, instead of building siloed compliance practices, you start benefiting from a cohort-based approach. And we think that's going to be highly consequential for businesses in terms of compliance no longer being a siloed, competitive, one-off thing to being one of saying, let's just make this just like cybersecurity, where we reached an agreement that sharing anonymized, tokenized data around breaches is beneficial to all organizations. We think compliance very much falls into the same mold.
Thank you, Kayvan, for sharing this insight and the track and the direction that you guys are headed. For those that want to learn more, you can go over to Compliance.ai and be able to get a demo and be able to dig into it more. But thank you so much, Kayvan, for your time.
Thank you so much. Very nice talking to you, Alex. Appreciate it.
And we'll see you all on the next episode of UpTech Report. Have you seen a company using AI, machine learning, or other technology to transform the way we live, work, and do business? Go to uptechreport.com and let us know.